Hello, welcome to today's HR Huddle. I'm Tamera Loerzel, and with me is my partner, Jennifer Wilson. We're glad to be with you all again. And today we are going to talk about Gen Z. And we've been talking about, generations in the workplace for many, many years, decades probably, if not more than that. And we thought we should stop and really look at the Gen Zs that are well into the workplace in our firms, because Gen Zs are 1996 and earlier, so 27 years old this year, and they've been with us at least 4 or 5 years or earlier if they were with us with interns or other positions. And so we thought we should stop and say, how are we really embracing and harnessing them, and making sure we're understanding them and creating programs in a firm that really leverages their views, their interests, their skills, and identifying what those are. So Jen, maybe we stop and define what that is, but there might be something else to start, but there might be something else you want to say from a setup perspective.
Yeah, I just think that I'm far enough into my generational reality that I have welcomed and witnessed a number of new generations come into the workplace, as well as more mature or experienced generations leave the workplace. I have always been really astounded and amazed by the difference that those generations coming in make. I am always an advocate for and a fan of organizations that welcome the new generation and study them and listen to them and learn from them and figure out how to take their fresh eyes and innovative ways, whatever those might be, to make the organization better. And I don't know that we feel compelled to do that all the time. I don't know that it's part of core strategy on the talent side, like, hey, we have enough of these folks now in the workplace. We need to really understand, study and understand. And I don't mean just academic study, like we can talk about some of the things we've learned, but also like study the people that work here that are part of this core group, and what do they think is working and not working, and what would they like to see more of and less of, and how could they contribute in ways that are different than we might have asked them to so far. So to me, the whole reason for this conversation today is for us to really stop and say, hey, maybe it's time for part of your 2024 strategy to be, let's embrace, welcome, roll out the welcome mat for our Generation Z folks. And as Tamera said, they're 26 or 27 and down, so they're your interns, they're your first years. They could be your second, third, fourth,
maybe
fifth
seniors.
year. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they could be seniors by now. And every generation is different. And of course, there are cusp folks. So the older ones are going to be in a closer mirror to your millennials, but your younger millennials are different than your older millennials. And so it's not necessarily trying to not hold them by birth year or by even title or tag. One thing millennials hated was being called millennial or Gen Y or any label. They were really like grossed out by that. And I guess what we're really trying to say is, hey, let's figure out the under 30 crowd and who are these people and what do they really value and in our organization, and how could we embrace them? We know our highest turnover, our pain point for turnover can be first 3 to 5 years and then 1 to 3 years in most organizations in the accounting profession. And who are those people? They're that incoming generation. Why do they leave? Because we don't get them, and because they don't get us, and they don't feel like it's going to be a firm that will reflect them and their values and their interests, and so they bail. How could we rectify that? If they're the kind of people we'd love to have in our organization, we need to shift our organization to have it feel like it will reflect their values and their desires. So what we've seen work over and over again is intentionality around learning about these folks, learning from them and figuring out how to embrace them, welcome them, and let them ripple all their cool ideas and all their interest and all their hopes, let them ripple those through the business and through the client base and make a massive difference like we've let the other generations before them.
Right. Love it. And I would just add that one of the things as we're studying about generations is, you said not to necessarily, pigeonhole them or, stereotype people, but just to understand the characteristics as a demographic. And part of understanding that is understanding the era in which they grew up. And I think one of the things that's obvious about this Gen Z as they completed high school and college was during the pandemic. And so that is unique. And I think each of our generations, if we go back and point to them, there's like unique occurrences that were happening in their lives that help shape their views, their values, what's important to them, their fears, their hopes, their dreams. So I think that's important to, keep in mind. And maybe one of the places I would start, Jen, you were just pointing to is the diversity and inclusion. And, we think that that's important strategy for all organizations and firms, but it is something particularly important that Gen Z values. And they want to belong to an organization that promotes belonging, feels like I belong, and is inclusive of diversity, diversity of people, diversity of sexual orientation, race, of thought, of perspective. They value open and transparent communication and views. They're willing to share about it in social media. Their current social media platform for Gen Z is TikTok. And so we need to be paying attention to those kinds of things as well. But that is something that, they look for is, what kind of culture are we creating here? And how are we really embracing individuals' uniqueness, but groups, uniqueness, the pronouns, really came. I mean, it was there a little bit before with some of the millennials, but really Gen Z has really, put that front and center, disclosing and sharing and asking about pronouns. But they want us to talk about diversity, embrace diversity, be inclusive of it, and have a place where I feel like I belong. And so I think that's a good place to start.
I love that, Tamara, and I agree with you 100%. I think that because inclusion is super important, and equity and the sense of belonging, and making sure the organization values those things at its core, from a global strategy to a departmental strategy and approach, or a service line approach, when they encounter kind of an intolerance, and when they encounter microaggressions, unwitting microaggressions, they're pretty sensitive to those things. And so we have to pay attention to that. Those of us that may have been raised with colloquialisms or euphemisms that we used in the past that we thought were, just part of normal everyday language and vernacular and storytelling, some of those things have been really found to be microaggressions against, a good number of people, and unwitting, microaggressions. I'll tell you one that I have used. I'm not proud of it, but it's one that I have really had to be conscious about, and it's circle the wagons. Like if I'm going to talk about strategy or get on the same page, let's get on the same page, Tamara. I'll say, in the past, I would say, let's circle the wagons and discuss, get the group together and discuss this and get on the same page. And, I had, a really wonderful young person who felt courageous enough to tell me, hey, I want you to know that in some circles that is seen as a microaggression against Indigenous people. And, it's from the, maybe the Civil War days or whatever, the post-Civil War, building the railroad, ugly stuff in our country's history related to the treatment of Indigenous people. And it is not seen as like a cool business term, so quit using it. And I was so happy that that person had the courage to educate me about that, but also it opened my eyes to the many phrases we use in our language of communication that are really if you dig back in and try to learn their history, they come from a dark place that none of us would be proud of. And so, and we, those of us who learned them and grew up with them, and the forefathers and mothers used them, we didn't know that. But younger people are sensitive to it, and they hear it, and they think, "Oh, super out of touch. You don't get it. You don't value diversity. It's clear. Listen to this language that you're using." And so it's just one of those things to pay attention to, that sensitivity is there, and getting educated about it, asking. What I do is I tell people, and I'll tell all of you here, our live stream audience and friends of ours in the HR community, if you hear me use microaggressions or phraseology that you think is in any way, negative against anybody, I want to know it. I need to be educated. I'm an open book, and I'll tell audiences that. I'll say, hey, I'm not trying to use any microaggressions in this conversation, but it's possible with my Midwestern roots and, my Episcopalian, female, Caucasian, middle-aged self, that narrow filter set, whatever that is, I could screw up and say something that would offend you, and I need you to come tell me afterwards, and I will stop. And so if we all did that as leaders and we really sensitively listened, we probably will stamp out a bunch of different things, but also recognize that sensitivity is there because we are becoming probably a more loving, inclusive profession and a more loving, inclusive nation, and interested in reparations and interested in, acknowledging our past, but not continuing to make those mistakes in the future. So that's important, I know, to the under 30 set.
Yes, for sure. For sure. And I think another one, Jen, is their commitment to mental health. And I know, again, during the pandemic, that rose, that I think when you and I were raised in organizations, like that was separate, not talked about, not an organization's responsibility. And today, the expectation is that is part of overall health and safety. Safety rose. It was just like assumed safety was there, but we had to specifically call it out in recent years. And part of that is, the mental health piece of health. And I think that's important as well. I grew up, with my mom in the Wellstone era here in Minnesota. And that was one of the things that he really drove, was mental health, programs. But I think our young people, want to have that right balance, that mix, remove the stigma that still exists around it. It's still not safe to talk about mental health or mental wellness or, any kind of support or needs. And I know probably most of our programs, if we were to talk to the HR professionals here, most of our programs have mental wellness support. It's included in our benefits, probably, but also just mental health, support channels that people have access to. But I also think it's something, that we just need to look at and say, how do we, most support that, and have it be part of our organizational strategy, have it not be taboo, have it not be something we're not responsible for as leaders, as part of that inclusivity, by the way. We need to be inclusive, that's part of our overall well-being, and the whole person has to be successful and well to be successful at work. We don't compartmentalize it. And I know that's like a traditional, baby boomers, older Gen X, we would compartmentalize that. Like that's work, that's home. That's not part of this. So including it, that's part of it, I think is another thing that they value and find important.
Gosh, Tamera. Yes, bring your whole self to work. Far more likely to use phrases like, I need a mental health day, or I do not feel psychologically safe. Yes, for sure. Our younger generation has grown up with those concepts, and their parents have taught them to value their mental stability as much as their physical stability. And the pandemic took a toll on mental health in this country. We did a whole bunch of different live streams and webinars about mental health because of how impacted it was by that very strange experience. All of us, all generations felt impacted. It's just that our Gen Zs are more likely to vulnerably share about it. And that is another characteristic. They are more likely to vulnerably share, which includes courageous sharing about things that they think might be wrong or might be inappropriate or outdated. They're more willing to sort of stick their neck out and say so, but also more willing to vulnerably share about how they are. And Tamara, you were talking about compartmentalization, and I was thinking, what an awesome word for hiding how I feel. Or or something, or like hiding that I am seeking a counselor or something, thinking that makes me sound weak or whatever the old story was we used to tell in the workplace about mental well-being, made it stigmatized, made it wimpy or weak, made it a bunch of stuff where we had to fake it with each other. And so that's another characteristic of, I think, both the Gen Z and millennials is a higher level of authenticity and realness. And Tamara knows, that like forever, we've been talking about our whole 24 years in business at Convergence. And way before that, she and I valuing authenticity and how crucial it is that our relationships are based on real, like who people really are and what people really value and what they really care about. And just like what you see is what you get kind of a thing. And Gen Z values that for sure.
Yes, they do. Yeah. They do. I think they're also.
By the way, Tamara, I was going to say is why my daughters take really hideous pictures of me and save them.
Yeah.
And post them later as jokes and stuff, because they're like, this is what my mom looks like.
Right. Exactly. This is the real mom.
Making sure that I'm vulnerable and humble and authentic too in my, frozen video moments and things like that.
Yes, exactly.
Those are better to them than a nicely staged family photo at the studio. Much rather not use those. So
yeah, they would prefer real.
Yeah.
So that's for sure. And so part of real, what I was going to say is another attribute is Gen Z are pragmatic. They're very real. They're very frank. They're, they say it the way it is, part of that transparency you were talking about. But it also can feel a bit cynical. They could have some cynicism, again, growing up and coming of age, if you will, during the pandemic, but also 24/7 news and devices in their hands since they were babies. I know millennials, digitally, we'd say digitally native, but Gen Z, truly digital native, they grew up with it, and my grandson for sure, he knows exactly.
Their phone is an extension of their hands.
Their hands and their thumbs are good.
That's like one of the characteristics. Oh yeah, and evolved thumbs.
Evolved thumbs. Evolved thumbs do not work the same as my sons or my grandsons, and so for sure. And so that's just something. It's not negative, but just again, if you think about, and that's why you got to understand like where they grew up. If you think about how they grew up and when they came of age, and what's been happening in our nation, in our world, in the society, that they've got a maybe pretty realistic, no, not much pie in the sky. It's not that they're not optimistic or hopeful, but there's just this pragmatism about them. So
definitely. And that let's, one more attribute that we'll throw down that Tamara just touched on is digital native.
Yes.
Technology forward. Really, I'm going to say technology impatient. Like, oh, for pity's sake, the Wi-Fi in here doesn't work. This place is terrible. We're never eating here again or something.
Or you don't have an app for that? What do you mean there's not an app for that?
There's which by the way is awesome because they're going to push us forward technologically, as you would expect every generation to do. But I am hearing from a lot of firm leaders that they are having such great luck bringing their Gen Zs into technology projects and into innovation committees and into not just strategy or what should we do or give us some feedback, but let's get it done type committees, and that they are making a big impact and having a blast doing it. And then also, like, social media for firms has to evolve,
Oh,
ladies
yeah.
and gentlemen. I mean, LinkedIn's fine, but it's not where most are playing these days. They're on Instagram, they're on TikTok. If your firm doesn't have a strategy for that right now, and you aren't really speaking to both talent and prospective clients on those platforms, Gen Z people in your firm will have a blast taking you there. And so there's just a lot. That's the tip of the iceberg. I think AI, bots, any streamlined automation, smarter, faster,
Handheld. My son doesn't even use his iPad anymore in school. He's a junior in high school. Everything is on his phone. I mean, he doesn't even know where his iPad charger is, let alone a laptop. Like, a laptop is dated.
Yeah.
Like, that was the dinosaur age. And so, for the millennials, it was a fax, was it, the dinosaur age. And for Gen Z, the laptop is a dinosaur. So we think it's like progressive that everybody has a laptop at our office, and they're going to be, I want to do all my work on my phone.
For sure. And it should be simple enough that I can.
Yes.
That's the thing. Like, what do you mean?
Secure. We got to figure out security, because I know that's one of the objections doing it on our phone is security and risk and privacy and all of those things. We've got to figure that out.
Yeah, but they'll help you.
Yeah,
they'll help you figure it out. And so I just, Tamera and I are learning. We are not expert on this subject. We are learning, and we are lucky that we have some children in our homes or not in our homes anymore that are teaching us, as well as talent that we get to work with in firms and in our own firm all the time that are helping us. But we want to hear what you're experiencing for sure. We want you to go out there and form focus groups and feedback centers and ongoing employee, advocacy groups inside your organization, advisory boards, whatever you want to call them, for this next generation, and really bring them in close and hear what they care about and find out how you can put that to work as a competitive advantage for your organization, and how you can cause it to create stickiness and retention and engagement with these folks. But we can't do it unless we ask them. And, Tamera and I gave you some examples, but those might not be the things that your younger people would put on their top priority list. So you got to go find them, but then share them back with us, because we're learning. We'd love to know. We're listening and learning. And so glad to talk to you about these things, process these things with you.
Yes. And we'll have more on this topic, I'm sure, in future HR huddles, and we would love to hear from you. So thanks for being with us today. We look forward to seeing you next Monday, and have a great week.